In this video, I'm going to explain the exact framework that I used to acquire 7 businesses, generating $850,000 a year in profit with little to zero down. And this is the same framework I've seen people with regular 9-to-5 jobs use to get funding and buy profitable businesses in 180 days or less. If you've been wanting to buy a business and think you need millions in the bank, make sure to pay attention. The key to acquisition funding is understanding this simple structure. The SBA loan, seller note, and then the buyer/investor capital injection. So we're going to break these 3 different ideas down, and you're going to see how we can structure these deals with little to sometimes zero money out of pocket. Typically, the SBA loan is going to be anywhere between 80 to 90% of a deal. So for the sake of the argument, we're going to put 90% right here. And we're talking 90% of the purchase price. So a business is selling for $1 million, we're talking $900,000 will be funded by an SBA lender. The second one is the seller note. Now, there's a couple ways in which you can break this down, but the typical structure that most of my students are doing is they're doing anywhere between a 5 and a 10% seller note. And then on the buyer or investor injection of capital, you're looking anywhere between 5 and 10% as well, okay? Now, as you can do the math, if the SBA is willing to go up to 90% and the seller note can be also 10%, well, that gets you to 100%, okay? That means that you can actually do with a zero out-of-pocket deal. Now, there's more ways in which there needs to be a couple different factors that make that happen. So we're going to go through that in just a second. So this structure right here, the trifecta approach, is what 90+% of the deals that my students are doing and small business acquisition in general are doing are utilizing these 3 things. We like to use all 3 in the same deal. Instead of just doing SBA loan and buyer injection, we are making sure that in every deal we do, we have a seller note. There's a couple of reasons for this. The seller note is something that not only is going to lower the amount that the buyer has to put in, but also it incentivizes the seller to make sure that they are going to be very involved day one after your acquisition because they want to make sure that you're going to pay them back. If they walk away and go on a cruise to Tahiti for the next year, and let's say you need help in the business, tough luck. If the business breaks down, yes, it hurts you, but it also hurts them because you owed them 5 or 10% of the purchase price. So let's actually compare this real quick to what a traditional loan can be. So as we talked about, the SBA can go up to 90%. What does a traditional business loan look like? You're looking at 25 to 30, sometimes even higher than 30% down from the buyer, and then the bank is covering the other 70, 75%. You are looking at only about 70% on average in terms of what a traditional bank is going to want to put down in the business, which means that you have the delta of 30% that you need to figure out. And you can still utilize seller note. And then you also obviously have you as the buyer. So as we're looking at this off the bat, there's already a 20% difference between these 2 different types of funding methods. And this method over here was created specifically for the average Joe and Jane to be able to go out there and acquire businesses, which is why we focus on using this product. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about what makes an SBA loan special. There's a couple different things that the SBA loan does and no other loans are going to be doing. One is you are typically locked into a 10-year term. Now, sometimes that can change, and especially if you have real estate in the deal. If you have real estate in the business acquisition deal and the real estate is worth more than 51% of the total purchase price, then that 10-year term can turn into a 25-year term. Now, that is awesome because when you take out a loan and you stretch the amount over 25 years, obviously the monthly payments are going to be less, which means your cash flow is going to be more. The next thing that we're going to do is talk about the typical interest rate that you're paying on this loan. Now, sometimes it can be fixed, sometimes it could be variable, meaning it changes with whatever the market rate is, what the Fed rate changes at. But typically, when you're looking at an SBA loan term and we're talking about it on a fixed basis, it's going to be the prime plus 2.5%. So whatever the prime rate is, you're going to add plus 2.5%, and that is typically market rate for an SBA loan. So right now, if we're taking this right now in January of 2025, that rate is going to be somewhere in the realm of 9 to 11%, depending on the bank, depending on the lender. And that is your annual interest rate on the loan. Now, some of the questions I get about SBA terms are, can you prepay it? Yes, you can. Can you refi out of it? Yes, you can. It operates like many other loans that people are used to using on the market, whether it be a real estate loan or other different types of business loans. Also, the cool thing about SBA loans, and this works with other conventional loans as well, is that when you're getting an SBA loan, one of the most important things that you need to do is make sure that you have enough working capital. It covers those expenses, those overhead expenses, especially when you first acquire your business, because if you're doing an asset purchase, day one, there's $0 in the bank account. You need to have money set aside to be able to bridge you from the gap of 0 in the bank account to now actually making cash flow in the business. And that can take months. So something with working capital is we always want to have more than enough. At least 3 months of the average expense to run the business we want sitting in an account or on a line of credit. Now, when you use an SBA lender, they're going to automatically give you a line of credit that is going to be accessed as working capital. Always make sure that you get a higher line of credit because more working capital is always better than less working capital. Okay, so now let's talk about the seller note structure. I mentioned it about a minute ago when I was talking through kind of the trifecta approach, which has the SBA loan, seller note, and then having the buyer injection or an investor injection of capital. That's kind of the trifecta approach. But now there are ways in which we can structure the seller note so that this counts as buyer injection of capital. And this is how we can get low and sometimes even zero down when we're acquiring a business. First thing I want to talk about here is the 2-year FSB, which stands for full standby. What does full standby actually mean? Full standby means that there is no payments on that seller note for at least 2 years. Now, why does this make a big difference? Well, when you're getting an SBA loan, the lender's going to be working with you and they really care about what the seller note is because this is another loan that is kind of competing with their loan. Now, even though they have first lien and the seller note will have second lien position, they still care because you're going to be making payments simultaneously to 2 loans. So they want to make sure that this loan is not going to inhibit you paying back your SBA loan. So when you put something on 2-year full standby, that means that for 2 full years after you acquire the business, you're not making any payments to this loan, which increases your cash flow, which to the bank, the SBA lender, this can be seen as a buyer injection of capital, okay? So they see that you are able to acquire the business. You don't have to worry about this debt for 2 years, which means you'll have extra cash flow. And in their eyes, that reduces the risk low enough to where they're going to count that as your buyer injection. Now, they can count it for the whole amount up to 10%, right? As we talked about it before, or they can count it for some part of it. Right? They'll typically at least count it for about 5%. So as we talked about it before, SBA is taking care of 90, and if we're able to get a 10% seller note on full standby for 2 years, they can count that as your buyer injection of capital, meaning your percentage is 0. They can decide whether to give you up to 10% for it. Typically, they're at least going to give you 5, which at most end would make you have to put in 5, you or your investor. See, this is one of the most important tools to be able to use in structuring your deal so they can put little to zero down. So as we're looking at the board right now, you're going to see a bunch of numbers. These numbers represent the amount of days it typically takes in the 3-step phase that we have for business acquisition. So the first day 1 through 90 is typically going to be the sourcing phase. Okay, so that's about 3 months worth of time. Now, as you start to build that pipeline, doing more and more research, connecting with more and more brokers, start doing off-market sourcing, this is going to start building up a really robust timeline to instead of working 3 months to get your first deal on the pipeline, you're going to now start seeing ones popping on every single week, right? The more time you spend, the more deals that qualify in your buy box are going to be jumping into that pipeline for you. And over time, it's going to become easier and easier to get deals under contract. First 90 days, we're going to be all about sourcing. The goal at the end of the 90 days is to have found a business that fits your buy box and getting it under LOI. Letter of intent. You're submitting an offer to the seller saying, I want to buy your business for this amount. I want you this involved in it after the acquisition. And here are the other things I want for the exclusivity period. All those things. You send that letter over to them. They say yes. They give their John Hancock on it. And now you're under contract. What happens in phase 2, right? So this is phase 1 over here, phase 2, and phase 3. Phase 2, 90 to 120 days. And now you are starting to do your due diligence on that contract, right? So we've got them under contract, and now we are doing due diligence. What is due diligence? This is where we are getting all of their financials, their bank statements, their tax returns, their P&Ls, all the information we can from a financial perspective, and we are giving it to a due diligence professional, which is typically a CPA. They're going to be doing something called a quality of earnings, and they're going to take about 3, 4, sometimes up to 6 weeks to decide whether or not this business is something that you should go and acquire, right? So they're going to go through, they're going to see how good the cash flow is, what is the reliability of it. They're going to go through the working capital requirements. You're going to go through your cash cycle. By the end of this due diligence, you're going to understand exactly how much you should make after taking out a loan, after getting seller financing, and what you can expect in that first year, okay? So we're doing diligence, and we're also doing a site visit. This is part of the diligence process. This is the non-financial part of the process. But you're going to go out there. If you are not local to it, you're traveling out to this business. You're meeting the seller in person. You're meeting all the key members of your team. And you're making sure that this business is actually what it's been advertised as. There's a lot of times where it looks amazing on paper. You go there in person, you walk in, and you're like, what did I get myself into? Okay? There are a lot of small businesses out there that are just bad businesses. And it's not just because maybe the numbers look okay on paper, but you walk in and you can see that everybody hates their life working there. The management is horrible, the way they treat their employees. And that is something that even if they're making money, it's not something that you want to be a part of. So you really want to get a good understanding of what that atmosphere is like. How do people treat one another? What is the culture like? Because those are things that are much harder to change than a bad P&L. So let's talk about phase 3 now, which is days 120 through 180. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to get the lender to start the underwriting process. So at this point, the lender has known about this deal since phase 2. In most cases, since phase 1, because you've given the deal over, the info you had, before you even made an offer, and the bank told you if they would lend on it or not. So you've known that the bank said that they would lend on this deal for now a couple months. But now we're in the spot where everything else is done, and now we're waiting for the bank to go through their process. The underwriting process could take sometimes 2 months, right? A lot of times if you're talking to an SBA lender, they'll tell you, oh, 30 days or 45 days. And the answer is usually none of the above. It's going to be 60 days, sometimes even 90 days. I've seen it even be over 100 days. So make sure you put this within your timeline. And so during this process, this is the underwriting, the bank is asking you a bunch of things. So you're giving them a bunch of paperwork saying, okay, let me know if you need anything else. Nothing happens for weeks. And then the bank comes back and says, oh, we need this. And you're like, okay, and you send them that. A couple more weeks passes by. And then you get another request for something else and you send it. And it's just this process constantly. And then you think you got everything in, you checked off all the things on the list, and then you think you're closing or you're going to be closing this month, and then the bank hits you with, oh, well, you need all these 20 different things. And you're like, how come you didn't tell me this weeks ago when I had nothing else going on? So don't get frustrated. It is something that tests the patience of every person who's gone through the process. Every single time that I've been a part of it, it always frustrates me. It's just the name of the game. Make sure to prepare for this process, that you are just being on top of everything you can. They're going to give you a checklist. Make sure that you're going through that checklist every day, making sure you're sending it to them as fast as possible, making sure you're sending a message to them saying, have you received these things? Because there's times where we send all the documents in and then a month later they tell us they never received them. You are the one, and I should probably write this in caps, you are the one who is running this process, okay? You can't rely on anyone else. No one else is going to be the advocate. You need to be the advocate in this process. Okay, so as you're going to get ready to go and talk with an SBA lender and get ready to go through the process, there's kind of 5 main things that you need to get together so that you show that you're ready. Okay, when you meet with that lender, you want to give the best first impression, meaning that you know exactly what they're going to need from you and you've already prepared it. So what are those 5 things? First is obviously just having an understanding of what your credit score is. They're going to eventually, if they work with you, check your credit score, but just go and pull a report. Okay, I think from all the 3 main credit agencies, you can have 1 free report you can pull and figure out what your credit score is. Obviously, they want the higher the better, okay? We try to tell our students to have a 650 or above so that lenders are not even asking a question. That's considered a good credit score. Obviously, if you have less than that, we've seen people with those lowest credit scores as 590, 600 get through the process. It's going to make the bank be slower and check a lot more things than they typically would have to because they're trying to make sure of your credit worthiness. After that, 3-year tax returns. Just go ahead right now, whether you're using, TurboTax or whether you have an accountant, however you're doing your own taxes, make sure you get the records of those last 3-year tax returns. And if you're an employee, your W-2s. PFS, that stands for Personal Financial Statement. If you want one, you can actually go to the SBA website, and on there you can download the one that they have. There's probably a dozen or so templates out there. If you just put into Google real quick, you can find it everywhere. The Personal Financial Statement is basically your balance sheet for you as a personal household, right? So you're going to put all your assets on the left-hand side, your liabilities on the right-hand side, and you're going to be able to basically list out what your net worth is. So all the things that are assets, your home, your cars the equity you have in stock, you have your 401k, in gold, crypto, whatever it may be. Then on the other side, on the liability side, is going to be your credit card debt, your car loans, all the things that kind of take away from your net worth. And listing them all out so that the bank is going to look at that and basically be able to come up with, based on this person's assets, we're okay with pre-qualifying them up to X amount. It could be as little as a couple $100,000 or up to $5 million or more. It all depends on the strength of your personal balance sheet. Next, your resume. Polish up your resume. It's something that people get embarrassed on because they give a resume that they last polished up 5-10 years ago, and it doesn't look good on you. So take an hour or 2, just write down the things you've done since the last time you updated it. Just put it in there. There's a lot of free resume builders online. You can use even ChatGPT to put it in there, make it really professional looking resume. Just take the time to do it. It's going to make you look much better in the application process. And then the business plan and projections. Now, I actually recommend a lot of my students to get a template with an SBA lender. You can look it up and kind of receive that template. It's not the best, right? It's a template that it's very archaic in the way that it's kind of laid out. You can actually go, if you don't want to do it yourself, or you want someone who has a better understanding of it, you can literally go on places like Fiverr or Upwork, find someone who does this for a living, pay them a few $100s. It will take all the financials. They will build out a great model for your projections, as well as all the different details for a business plan. And then you get it, you edit it yourself, you add things that you want to add into it, and this now will look professional. You know that a professional actually created it for you, so the numbers are accurate, and you study it, understand it. Don't just do that and go and give it to an SBA lender because they're going to ask you questions. So make sure you understand exactly what's on that business plan and how they got those projections so that you can go and present it to the SBA lender. But these are the things that you need to make sure that you're aware of going down this process. Let me show you some real examples from some of my students. Here's Adam's deal. He did a $4 million marketing agency deal. He got a 20% seller note, and he got that 20% seller note on 2-year full standby. And the bank saw that 20% note because it was structured in the way that I just talked about with the 2-year full standby. They saw that as a buyer injection of capital. So instead of having to put 10% down, the bank ended up covering 100% of the finance price. That deal now makes Adam nearly $1 million a year in profit. It was a home run. Then you have Melissa's deal. Melissa bought a $975K commercial pool cleaning company in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. She got the deal with SBA funding, which covered about 90% of the purchase price, and Melissa brought the other 10 in order to get the deal done. That deal now pays Melissa over $300,000 a year in cash flow. Then we have Lindsay's deal. Lindsay bought a $1 million carpet cleaning business. Now, previously, Lindsay was a customer success manager working for a tech company, so this was not her background, but she was still able to negotiate with the seller, get it under contract, and close the deal. She was able to negotiate a small down payment, got over 90% financing from the SBA, and then was able to close the deal and now make over $150,000 a year in profit in year 1. Now, if you want to learn how to exactly structure these deals, just like my students that I went through have, and how they were able to get their deals done with little to zero money out of their own pocket, listen up. I have a program called Acquisition Ace where I walk my students through the entire acquisition process. I made this program because it's exactly what I wish I had before I started wasting tens of thousands of dollars when I was trying to get my first deal done. So if you want to pay for a shortcut, this might make sense for you. There's going to be a link in the description below if you're interested. But if you're not quite ready yet, I highly recommend you go and check out the free course on my channel that goes through the entire acquisition process A to Z. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.